We worked on the admin side and on the basic product. Let's now add a user again, and let's see how we can add a user model, how we can connect it to a product, and so on. For that, I'll go to my user.js file in the models folder. And first of all, I want to import Mongoose here by requiring Mongoose like that. So let's now work on the user schema. Well, first of all, we need to define the schema. So the user schema. The user schema is defined by using something from the Mongoose package, which you don't have to, but I will store in a separate constant. So Mongoose schema. With that, we can call new schema down there, and I pass a JavaScript object to that constructor. And in that object, we describe how a user should look like. Now here, I will say that I want to have a name where the type of data will be a string, and this will be required. As a next field, I want to have an email as well. This will be of type string, and this will also be required, like that. Now, we also used a card before, and I still want to embed the card into my user document. That hasn't changed just because we use Mongoose. So we'll add my card here. And now in that card, that will be an embedded document, and we can define it just like that. I will add items here, and items will be an array, and this is how you define that you want to store an array in here. You simply create an array, and then you add what is inside of this array. You could say an array of strings if you have an array of strings, or numbers or booleans, or an array of, well, documents. That, of course, is also possible. Now, I want to have an array of documents where I have a product ID, which I'll configure with this document here. I'll come back to that. And I'll have a quantity. And the quantity, I'll configure that right away, will have a type of number and is required. Now, what's the product ID here, though? The product ID will have a type of, and now I need to get something from the schema. There we have a types field, and there we got all these special types like object ID. So I'm telling Mongoose that this will actually store an object ID, because it will store a reference to a product. And that this also is required. Now, that is a bit of a more complex schema, therefore, because we have an embedded document and we have an array of then even embedded documents. But this is how a user should look like. Now, just as before, I'll export this by calling Mongoose model, give this a name, and the name will be user. Hence, this will be stored in a user's collection because Mongoose will automatically take the plural lowercase version of that as a collection name. And I pass my user schema here. Okay, so now we got everything we need to inform Mongoose how a user should look like. Now, of course, I want to work with a user. And for that, I'll go back to the app.js file, and I will actually create a user here before we start listening. For that, let me import the user model again in app.js. And with that import added, I can create a new user by simply calling new user. And just as before, I pass a JavaScript object where I configure it, where I assign a name, where I assign an email, and where I also need to set my card, and that card will have an array of, well, empty items. So this is my user. I can then call user save, and this will be done when I start my server. So here, after it restarted, we should have a user already. If we refresh the overall database server, we indeed see our users. There we see one user with that nested data. So now with that user created, it's that ID I'm interested in. So let me copy that ID and go back to the app.js file and comment this middleware back in. Here, I again will find a user by ID. I just need to paste in that ID of that user we just created. Find by ID is a method provided by Mongoose, so this will work. We get back the user here then, and then I can simply store that user in my request. And keep in mind, this is a full Mongoose model, so we can call all these Mongoose model functions or methods on that user object, and therefore also on the user object, which I do store here. So this should work. If I now save this for every incoming request, it should actually give us that user. Now, one issue is that with every restart of the server, we also create a new user, as you can see here. So let me delete that new user, because I have my user creation code down there, and I don't check whether I want to create one or not. So what I'll quickly do is, I will first of all see if we do have a user with user find one, and find one with, if I give it no arguments, will always give me back the first user it finds. And then here in the then block, I will have my user object, and only if this is undefined, so if it is not set, only then I will create a new user. So therefore, now, if I refresh this, we shouldn't have a new user. If I, however, delete that first user here, and I therefore temporarily get rid of that, let's say, and I save and it restarts, now if I refresh my users collection, I do have a new user. And now I just need to grab that ID and paste it back in here. And now we get a setup where I don't constantly create new users. Okay, so this is how we add a user model and how we basically use it. But now, of course, we want to use it in conjunction with the products model and with the products. So let's do that in the next lecture.